Well, the long wait finally came to an end earlier this week. Pat Narduzzi finally filled out his coaching staff. He had 3 open spots to fill, and he made the hires for those 3 spots a couple days ago. I think it was announced on Tuesday. So talked a little basketball yesterday because we had to, because the game happened on Tuesday night. But we do want to talk about the coaching staff appointments, the 3 new hires. What are they bringing to Pitt? Do they fill in what Pitt needs? How do they fit in on this staff? And what do they tell us? What do the hires of these 3 guys tell us about what Pat Narduzzi has been looking for this offseason? Let's talk coaching hires, coaching staff, and filling out the staff and the assistant coaching positions here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Radio, it's Thursday. It's the Morning Pitt. It's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. Glad to be with you this morning. You know the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com, and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans all day, every day. People are talking about Pitt sports on Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. We give you all the football coverage, all the recruiting coverage, all the basketball coverage, and then we give you the message boards where you can talk to other Pitt fans about it. It's the best online community of Pitt fans that you're going to find. And so when Pitt stuff happens, you can read what we write about it, and then you can go talk to other Pitt fans about it. You always want to talk to other Pitt fans about Pitt stuff. Well, you might not always be around another Pitt fan. You can text, and that's one thing, but it's fun to go into the message boards and talk with a few hundred or a few thousand other Pitt fans and get in those conversations. So check it out if you're a Pitt fan. You want to talk to other Pitt fans, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And then, of course, our YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's a place you can find all of our Pitt video content, whether it's these daily morning Pitt videos that we put out every Monday through Friday, our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night. We did it last night at 8 o'clock. Me and Jim Hammett get together and talk with you for a little while. About an hour or so, talk a little Pitt sports, and we talk, Jim and I talk, but then also you can join the conversation too. We have the chat screen on the right, and you can put your comments and your questions in there, and we sort of have a back and forth. We engage. It's fun. We do that also after road basketball games. So Pitt plays Duke this Saturday. After the game is over, we will go live for an hour or less or more, whatever it takes, and talk about the game, what we saw. I don't think anybody has any high expectations for that one. Nobody's really too excited about what's going to happen in that game, but we will talk about it live after the game ends. And we'll do it right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and that way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, 3 coaching positions hired this week. Completes the coaching staff as far as we know, unless somebody in a surprise move bolts from the defensive side. But it seems like now, as we're moving past the midpoint of January, I think it's largely, it's probably the way it's going to be. The staff is pretty much put together. And there's certainly been some turnover this offseason. I mean, we've talked about the complete overhaul that Pat Narduzzi has made on this offensive coaching staff. He's now changed 4 out of the 5 coaches. Taekwon Underwood, the only Pitt offensive assistant coach who survived the offseason, so to speak, if you want to look at it that way. Frank Cignetti fired basically the day or 2 days after the Duke game, the regular season finale. And then once we got past signing day, Narduzzi fired Dave Borbely, the offensive line coach, Andre Powell, the running backs coach / special teams coordinator, and Tim Salem, the tight ends coach. Salem and Powell, of course, were longtime members of Narduzzi's staff. They were among his first hires. They were on his first coaching staff way back in 2015. Borbely joined the staff, I believe, in 2017. Forget if it was 17 or 18, but he was on the staff in 18. I know that for sure because he helped run that offensive line that ultimately opened holes for Darren Hall and Quadri Olson to each rush for 1,000 yards that season. He's overseen some good offensive lines, overseen some offensive lines that struggled, certainly had some injury issues along the way. But those 3 guys were out. And so Pitt, and Pat Narduzzi set out to find a new offensive line coach, a new running backs coach, a new tight ends coach, and a new special teams coordinator. In addition to the offensive coordinator, they hired Cade Bell to fill that spot and made that hire relatively quickly. Never as fast as anybody wants, but relatively quickly, Cade Bell was hired. But the other 3 spots, Narduzzi took his time looking for whatever he was looking for to fill those ultimately 4 roles. 3 roles on the offensive coaching staff plus special teams coordinator. And the hires were as followed. Jeremy Darvo, offensive line coach, comes to Pitt from Western Carolina. Lindsey Lamar will take over the running backs after being the offensive coordinator at Howard. And then Jacob Bronowski comes in as the tight ends coach and special teams coordinator, a role that he held at Miami of Ohio for the last 2 years. And we'll start with Bronowski. He seems like he's maybe the most high profile of these hires. You read his bio, the bio that Pitt officially released, the bio that he has on the Miami of Ohio website. You search his name, and you're going to find a lot of praise for his work as a special teams coordinator at Miami of Ohio. I think 247 named him the special teams coach of the year. I sort of feel like, and I mean, there's probably a bigger conversation to be had about all assistant coaches, but I sort of feel like special teams coordinator is one of those spots that like definitely is going to get more blame and more credit than they are due. Was Andre Powell a great special teams coordinator when Quadri Henderson had 4 return touchdowns in 2016? Sure, we all talked about him as such. Was he a terrible coordinator in the last 2 years when Pitt's punting game went in the toilet? Sure, and we talked about him as such. It's the same guy. It's the same guy who coordinated both of those special teams units. I think what's interesting is when you read the press release that Pitt put out with a quote from Pat Narduzzi, he said, Bronowski's special teams units are, quote, extremely organized and executed at a high level. And that part of the quote, that part of the press release really stuck with me because more than return touchdowns, more than great punting or great field goal kicking, I think it's just about having a unit that doesn't screw up. To me, when I look at special teams these days, right? I mean, you have several different phases of special teams. There's kickoff, punt, kick return, punt return, field goal, extra point, right? I think that's pretty much it. If you have a great return guy, you have a great return guy. And a great return guy doesn't necessarily mean you're a great special teams coordinator. It means you have a great return guy, right? If you have a great kicker and a great punter, you have a great kicker and a great punter. It doesn't necessarily mean you're a great special teams coordinator. It means you have a great kicker and a great punter. And so many of those kickers and punters work with their own individual coaches. Ben Saul's performance in the Sun Bowl when he made 5 field goals or whatever it was that because Andre Powell was a great coordinator? Or was that because Ben Saul's was a really good kicker and works with a personal trainer and a personal kicking coach and all of that? Caleb Junko's struggles this past season, is that because Andre Powell stinks? Or is it because Caleb Junko, I think by his own admission, didn't work with a personal kicking coach? Those things, I feel like when you're trying to evaluate a special teams coordinator, you have to strip away those things and get down to some basics. Do you consistently give your returner an opportunity to bring it back? And actually, I even set that one aside. Kick returns have become so almost irrelevant. They're relevant like 2 times a year or something like that, or 3 times a year. And I'm of the mind, if you can kick it out of the end zone, kick it out of the end zone. Don't even worry about it. Everybody should do it. Everybody should just get the ball at the 25, actually. But coverage units. And this is probably the area I would think that Narduzzi is really emphasizing when he says that Bronowski's units were, quote, extremely organized and executed at a high level. Don't screw up. You don't need, if you get that special teams coach of the year recognition, it probably means you had a big returner, a big time returner or a big time kicker or a big time punter. It doesn't necessarily mean that you did all those little things right. Like either kicking it out of the end zone every time on field goal or on kickoffs, or, covering kicks well enough that nobody ever gets past the 20. I want my special teams coordinator to have an organized unit that executes at a high level, to use Pat Narduzzi's terminology, so that the other team never gets any extra yards, never gets any more yards than we want them to have in the return game. You know, it's hard enough to defend offenses in college football these days. You don't need to give up extra yards because your unit is sloppy or because your scheme is a mess. That, to me, is the main thing that Jacob Brownowski needs to bring here. And it seems like that's what he was able to do well at Miami, Ohio. It seems like that's what his main appeal was for Pat Narduzzi. And he just so happens to also coach tight ends. Now, Brownowski hasn't coached tight ends since like 2018, 2019 seasons at Robert Morris. Since then, he's been a special teams coach and a defensive coach, defensive assistant or a quality control or something like that, or a GA or whatever it is, and a special teams coach and a special teams coordinator. I think he was brought here for his work on special teams. I think he, can coach tight ends, but I think Narduzzi wants clean, executing at a high level, organized special teams play in the coverage units and the return units. And if they have the athletes back there to break a long return, how many times, if you've watched these videos before, you've heard me talk about stuff like this before, to me, on the return unit, I want a guy who can catch the ball. And I'm just talking about kick returns here. I want a guy who can catch the ball and is, take my top 10 fastest guys on the team. Which one of them can catch the ball the best? That's who's returning kicks. And then my coordinator's job is to set up a scheme and implement, install a scheme and coach a scheme that can open holes for that guy to make a play. That's what I want. And the scheme can create the opportunity for a big return. And then the player is the guy who makes that play. But Brownowski, I think is, maybe the best hire out of these three. Just kind of looking at it on a very surface level. We'll find out as time goes on and we get a chance to see what these guys actually do on the recruiting trail and on the field. But it looks like Brownowski's the biggest hire, maybe the best hire of these three, simply because of his experience and work on special teams. It's not even as much about the tight ends. It's about special teams. And then there's Jeremy Darveau. I don't know if it's Darvo or Darvo. I'll go back and forth and say it both ways until I figure out exactly how to pronounce it. Coming into the offensive line coach, he went to Louisville, actually played against Pitt at Louisville as an offensive lineman. He was a JUCO guy and then went to Louisville for a couple years, I think 2004 and 2005. So relatively young, like all these guys are. The most important thing with him, if you look at his resume, Southern Miss, Missouri State, USF, Valdosta State, you say, not a lot of Power 5 experience in there. But he comes directly and most recently from Western Carolina, where he was the offensive line coach for 2 years. And the connection's obvious. He was Cade Bell's offensive line coach. And, I think there's probably some element of Bell recommending Darveau, I would guess. Why you would assume that's the case. But I also think, as I was thinking about this, I was like, well, why would it make sense to hire the Western Carolina offensive line coach to come in with the Western Carolina offensive coordinator? There's a need for this offense to hit the ground running right away. This offense needs to be good now. No, a year or two, well, the guys finally got the offense, and I think we'll see some big steps for it. No, they need to be good now. They need to be good in 2024. And every step you can take to help ease that transition and smooth that process and increase the likelihood of having success in year one under Cade Bell, you have to take those steps. And if one of those steps is bringing in the offensive line coach who just coached in this offense for the last 2 seasons, who's not going to have that acclimation period of getting up to speed and still learning the offense. There's times where we hear guys, coaches say like, I'm like the players. I'm still learning this offense too. No, there's none of that here. He knows the offense. All right, that step has already been taken. So all he has to do is teach it to the players. And I think that, as much as anything, helps accelerate the installation process, helps accelerate the acclimation process, and helps accelerate the process of this offense becoming a functioning unit. Running back, tight end, wide receiver, not as much. Offensive line needs to know it. The offensive line needs to have this offense ingrained in it. They need to know it. And it's much easier if the coach already knows it than if everybody's trying to learn it together, the players and the coach. In this situation, they hired the guy who already knows it, who ran it for the last 2 years, ran it successfully for the last 2 years, and should be able to translate that into coaching the offensive lineman that he's inheriting at Pitt. I think that was a big part of the appeal. I mean, he seems like a perfectly fine coach. Again, no real experience at the Power 5 level. I think it was quality control or something like that at Florida, but no real offensive line coaching experience at the Power 5 level, but he's got experience with this offense, and I think that's got to be the big draw. Lindsey Lamar, a guy who graduated from USF in 2012, another guy who played against Pitt in his playing career at USF in the waning days of the Big East. Lamar comes to Pitt after being the offensive coordinator at Howard for 1 year. He was a coach at Howard for about 4 years, mostly focused on wide receivers. He was the OC this last season, and he comes to Pitt now. He's been in Pittsburgh before. He had an NFL coaching fellowship with the Steelers. He also, after a playing career, CFL, that kind of thing, spent 4 years coaching in sort of various positions and capabilities at USF. Before moving to Howard as a full-time assistant and now coming to Pitt as a running backs coach. Doesn't really have background as a running backs coach. As I say, at Howard, I think his emphasis was mostly on receiver, but he was also a play caller. He was an offensive coordinator. I think that gives him an advantage. I think, I think one of the keys here is, Lamar as a younger coach, somebody who's not that far removed from his playing days and also has been in some competitive recruiting environments, working at USF and then trying to recruit to Howard. I think you're looking for a recruiting boost here. I think you're hoping that Lamar is going to come in and recruit well for you. And there's something to be said for, you hope you get the guys that can coach the players and develop the players, but you also really need the guys who can go get the players. You need the guys who can go out and get good players to come here because, when it's the Jimmies and Joes or the X's and O's, I mean, good players, just like we talked about with Andre Powell, good players can make a good coach look pretty good. Andre Powell's a great example, right? Andre Powell was the running backs coach when Quadri Olison rushed for 1,000 yards as a redshirt freshman in 2015, and when James Conner came back from having cancer and rushed for 1,000 yards in 2016, and when Olison and Darren Hall each rushed for 1,000 yards in 2018, and he was the running backs coach in 2022 when Izzy Abanikanda led the nation in rushing touchdowns and set a Pitt record for single game rushing. He was a running backs coach for all of those. He was also the running backs coach in 2019, 2021, 2020, and 2023 when they couldn't run very well and there were a lot of very curious personnel decisions. What was the difference? It was the players. It was the players he had. And granted, there were some things that Powell did in there that didn't always help the situation, but it really was about the players. So when I look at these guys, I think they all need to be able to recruit. You need Bernowski, Darveau, and Lamar all to be able to hit the recruiting trail hard, recruit it well. And you'd like to think, since they're all younger guys, I think Darveau might be 40, 41 years old, maybe 42. I don't know his exact age, but he's in his early 40s. And he's the oldest of these three hires, actually the oldest of these four hires that they've made, if you include Cade Bell. They're all younger coaches. They're all young and not that far removed from their playing days, but each with a decent amount of coaching experience that they've accumulated since they graduated from college. And or hung up their professional spikes, so to speak. And so you'd like to think that younger coaches like that are going to be able to connect with the players. They're going to be able to, have a lot of energy on the recruiting trail, and they're going to help you in that regard. Now, if you're Pitt, you're always probably going to make up the bulk of your roster with 3-star recruits who you need to evaluate well and coach well and develop well. So that has to be part of it. You need to have good developers, good evaluators, good and good coaches, but they've also got to be able to recruit. And we'll see what Bernowski, Darveau, and Lamar do, in that regard. But they are all younger coaches, which should, I don't know, it sort of feels like it could benefit Pitt on the recruiting trail. It's certainly a contrast to what they're replacing. Pat Narduzzi has always gone with older coaches on the offensive side of the ball, with rare exceptions like a guy like Taekwon Underwood, but he's mostly deferred to older veteran coaches on that side of the ball while he keeps most of his focus on defense. Well, I don't know if his focus is shifting, but he's certainly going in a different direction with these hires, bringing in guys as young as Bell, Bronowski, Darvo, and Lamar are. And so, if you want to say Pat Narduzzi, oh, he's so stubborn, he's so this, he's so that, well, he's changed his ways with these hires. And I think he's got a new perspective on offense. I'm sure when we ask him if he's got a new perspective on offense, he'll tell us that no, he's not thinking about it any differently. He's doing the same thing he's always done. But it's certainly, words are one thing and actions are another. And it certainly looks from Pat Narduzzi's actions like he's taking a new approach to offense. So we'll see how these guys work out. Hopefully we'll speak to them in person sometime soon. I'd like to have some in-person contact with these coaches, get to know them and hear from them a little bit about why they're coming to Pitt, what they think they can accomplish here. Cade Bell as well. So looking forward to hearing from all four of those guys, plus all the transfers who are coming in. There's a lot of new faces in the South Side, and we look forward to interviewing them. You'll find all of that on Panther-Lair.com and right here on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe. That way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. We've got the Friday mailbag tomorrow, so if you're a Panther-Lair.com subscriber, post your questions on the message board, on the Between Fifth and Forbes message board, and that way we'll answer as many as we can in tomorrow's mailbag. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you've had a great week so far. We're more than halfway through it. Enjoy your Thursday, and we will talk to you tomorrow on the Morning Pit, the Friday edition, right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.